Last time I filmed outside, my laptop almost exploded from overheating, so we're gonna see how it goes this time. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and thanks for joining us if you're new here. My name is Maddie, and today I'm gonna be wrapping up everything that I read in May. Surprisingly, considering the fact that I was moving and starting a new job and just dealing with a lot of general life stuff, I still somehow managed to read 10 books. I don't know if that was me using books as a coping mechanism, but let's not psychoanalyze that too much. So the very first book that I read this month was The Magic Fish, and this book had been on my TBR for a really long time, and it was one of the books that I wanted to get to in May as part of Read with Cindy's Asian Readathon. And it is a graphic novel, and it follows this main character whose name I'm completely blanking on. I swear, I'm not this bad with people's names in real life. But essentially, he wants to come out to his family as gay, but there's no word for it in Vietnamese, and he's trying to kind of navigate this barrier between the two of them. So it's really interesting the way that they use story and narrative to bridge this gap to communicate between the two of them. And it also has some really beautiful messages about representation. I thought the use of the color scheme in this book was amazing because it's usually monochromatic, but when it switches to certain stories that they're telling, so like one retelling of the story will be like a yellow and the next one will be in a red. It was also really interesting to me because a lot of the stories that he reads with his mother are retellings of Cinderella, but they're pulled from different cultural backgrounds, which is really interesting to me to see the ways that myth and legend kind of transcends barriers in ways that we don't always think about or realize or understand. So I really loved that book. It lived up to the hype. I'm so glad that I was able to read it, and it's been a while since I read a graphic novel, so that was great. After that, I read Good Morning, Good Night. I think I started this back in January or December, and I was kind of like doing a couple of them a day because it's essentially this collection of tweets that Lin-Manuel Miranda did where he would post one in the morning and then one at night, and then it's illustrated by Johnny Sun. They were okay. I wasn't really like blown away by any of them. There wasn't really a ton that stuck with me. It was kind of sweet, not necessarily a bad thing to have around, but yeah, not really. I don't know how often I'll go back and flick through some of those things again, but I do love Johnny Sun's art style, so that is also something that was nice to see mixed in there, and that's actually why my mom got me the book. I got it for Christmas a couple of years ago. After that, I read Shadow and Bone. And this book and the next book I talk about in a video where I talk about YA and heteronormativity, because I was really looking forward to reading this series. I had heard so much good stuff about it, and then I wanted to be able to watch the Netflix show, and I read the book and I was so disappointed. Like, it felt like the system of magic just basically changed to fit whatever the plot needed. Essentially, it follows this young girl who finds out that she is a Grisha, which is kind of like these magical beings in their universe, but she is this like very special kind of Grisha that's called like the Sun Summoner, and then she's hoping to be able to get rid of like the Shadow Fold, which is kind of this like dark, murky area that's very dangerous within their world. But yeah, just some of the like relationships and some of the things about the story felt like so predictable and cliche and overdone. I think it's possible to use cliches in a way that like enhance and bring more to the book, and in this case it just felt kind of like flat to me, like just another generic YA book. But if you want to hear me talk more about it, I will link that video above. After that, I read Holding Up the Universe, which is by Jennifer Neven, who wrote All the Bright Places. And it was actually kind of disappointing to me because I was really hoping to like this book as much as I liked All the Bright Places. It follows two characters. So the main male character has, I think it's proplanasia, but basically it's like face blindness. So he can't recognize people by their faces at all, even like his own family members. He kind of has to use these other identifiers to be able to tell who people are. And then the main female character struggles with her weight, and essentially she became so obese at a point in time that they had to lift her out of her house. And that was the only thing that I found like difficult from the book, and it's a little bit difficult for like me to speak on because that's not necessarily an experience that I can relate to, but sometimes I didn't feel like it was dealt with in the right light. Like, while they did really navigate how awful and mean that like kids can be to people who look different or act different, I didn't necessarily feel like I was coming through the book with a better understanding. I felt like the face blindness I understood better than her experiences. So there was just a lot in the book that didn't sit right with me. And that's something else that I also talk in that video if you want to check that out. After that, I read Heartstopper Volume 4, and this is a continuation of Nick and Charlie's story by Alice Oseman. We're dealing a lot more in this issue with Charlie's mental health issues and his eating disorder, and Nick's relationship with his father. So it can get a little bit heavier at sometimes, but Alice Oseman does an amazing job with doing content and trigger warnings, so just keep that in mind if that's something that you want to read. I'll link my video I have about Heartstopper above somewhere if you want to hear more about that series. And I'm so excited because I keep seeing all of this amazing content from the TV show that they're making. So I can't wait until that comes out, hopefully in early 2022, to be able to watch that as well. But yes, I love Nick and Charlie. They have such a special place in my heart. Oh, so good. I highly recommend you check it out. After that, I read Earthlings, which was another one of my books for the Asian Readathon, and this book started out really promising. So it follows Natsuki from when she's a kid, and she feels like she has these like superpowers almost. She gets this like wand and has this hedgehog who's from an alien planet that's called like Popimbopia or something like that. I don't know, it just made me think of those like Bop It things every time I read it on the page, and the commercials for them. That's completely unrelated though. And it follows her as a child in this relationship that she has with her cousin. I feel like I do need to like content and trigger warning for like cannibalism, incest, and just, I guess, like body horror kind of. It gets weird at the end, which is part of where I really struggled with this book, because, you know, it seemed like it was using this system of like magic or powers that she had, and then that shifts into like her being an alien and her husband, who is described as asexual in the description of the book, but that's never used as a term throughout the book, which I have problems with the representation for that, but that's a whole other video. At first, it was going to be this statement about how, you know, there's these conversations about like being made into a baby making machine in society, and it felt like it was going to be a statement about not fitting into like that amatonormativity narrative and like wanting something different from your life than what like society is telling you you need. But then like that devolved into like cannibalism. I guess that's a bit of a spoiler, but it like devolves into like all of these really like awful, weird ways of like fighting back against society that like kind of loses sympathy for the characters, and that was a little bit disappointing to me and just a bit of a shock to read in general. The next book that I read is A History of My Brief Body, which is by Billy Ray Bellecourt, and that is a memoir about, well, like being Indigenous and being queer and a kind of his relationship to his body and to his ethnicity and to his sexuality and the way those things intersect with one another. I loved it. Some of his conversations about indigeneity really resonated with me, and experiences that I've also had, and trying to find your place not only as an Indigenous person but as a queer Indigenous person, and understanding the way that those intersect with one another and how the history of colonialism comes into that. It was a beautiful book, really well written, almost poetic at times, and he pulls a lot from quotes and theories of other authors, which was something else that really resonated and stuck with me, because I am also that person that like speaks through quotes by being like, look at this thing, do you understand what I'm saying with this? So I love that book. 5 stars, would highly recommend. Next, I read The Song of Achilles, which I won't talk about too much because I did a little reading vlog on that, but it is the story of Achilles and Patroclus and their love for each other and their life story to the Battle of Troy and everything that goes down there. This book has been recommended all over the internet, and I was so glad to have it live up to the hype, and just the way that it was written from Patroclus's perspective was so interesting to me, and I think it's one of the best books that I've read that does a really good job of humanizing a hero and also looking at the horrors of war, being told that you're this chosen one and that you have to essentially lose a part of yourself in fulfilling the destiny that you've been told is what you're supposed to be doing with your life. So, would also recommend that one. It's not overhyped at all. It is phenomenal. After that, I read Every Day, which is by David Leviathan, and he wrote Two Boys Kissing, which is one of my favorite books of all time. I didn't quite like this one as much. I can't remember if I gave it 2 or 3 stars, but it follows A, and they wake up in a new body every single day. This has happened ever since they were like a baby, so they're always waking up in the body of like whatever age they are at that point in time. It could be a boy, it could be a girl, it could be someone else. So I thought that was kind of interesting, the way that there was this kind of like understanding of learning different experiences, like through being in the body of someone who's an addict, or being in the body of someone who's blind, or like being in the body of someone who has some sort of illness and their body doesn't, you know, work for them the way that they want it to. But it's also this love story because he falls in love with someone and he wants to be with them no matter what. And I just found the ending was a little bit difficult because it felt like we didn't really get that resolution. And I know that there's more books that are written after that, but I think that they're just told from Rhiannon's perspective, who is the girl that he falls in love with, so I don't know if I would get that resolution that I was seeking throughout the story. But either way, not a bad read. They kept bringing up Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, which is a great song, so no complaints about that from me. And the very last book that I read this month is probably my favorite book that I read this month. It's a complicated love story set in space by Sean David Hutchinson, who wrote We Are the Ants, which I think was one of my favorite books that I read last summer. And this follows Noah and DJ and Jenny, who all end up trapped on this spaceship, and they don't really know how they got there or what's going on. And DJ and Noah start to fall for each other, and Noah's kind of trying to navigate these feelings that he has about DJ and a past relationship, while they're also trying to figure out how to get home and why they're trapped here in the first place. The plot twist at the end and the turn that the narrative takes is so smart and so brilliantly well done. I'm like, I could write a whole like queer theory essay on this book and still have more to talk about it. I loved it. I loved the characters. I love Sean David Hutchinson's writing. This book came out in January and I'm like, why didn't I take the time to read this earlier? It was so good. The cover is just gorgeous, and yes, it's such a great story. So I think it's difficult sometimes to do a story in like one setting with such few characters, but you really get a sense of the space and an understanding of the characters and who they are and how they relate to each other, and you're just rooting for them the whole way through. So I would definitely check out that book if you are a fan of We Are the Ants, or if you just want a lovely little queer sci-fi that's going to take you all over the galaxy, read that book too. So that's everything that I read this month. I think I read 10 books. I think I'm finally on track for my Goodreads reading challenge, so that's like 40 books this year. I'm looking forward to getting to do the mid-year freakout tag in June coming up, and I have a couple other ideas about videos that I want to do. I want to do one about Indigenous History Month, and I also want to touch a bit on that, about the tragedy in Kamloops with the residential school there, where they've just found the bodies of 215 children. If you don't know about that story or the history of residential schools in Canada, I'm going to put some links down below. Please take the time to check that out and look into wherever you are, wherever you live in the world, whose land that you're on, and what the history of that land getting from them to you is, because a lot of times it is not great, and there is a lot of stealing and death and disruption of culture and forced assimilation. So I would definitely really encourage you, please, please, please take the time to educate yourself and learn more about the Indigenous people wherever you are in the world, whether that is Canada or whether that is somewhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned to my next video. I'm going to try and get back to a more regular posting schedule. If there's other video ideas that you'd like to see over the summer months, please drop me a comment down below and let me know. Until then, yeah, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell so you get notifications, and I'll see you in the next video. Till then, stay kind.